Hello, welcome to the Beverly Hills Bar Association Real Estate Sections program for July. We've entitled it How New Fire Risk Policies Are Shaping Land Use and Construction. The truth of the matter is it's probably also reciprocal, because I think what's going on in land use and construction is influencing what is happening on the insurance policies. I'm Joe Cobert. I am the past chairman of the real estate section and on the executive committee now. I am one of the moderators. The other moderator is Larry, or Lawrence Hummer. You can see him smiling. He's on the executive committee as well. Both Larry and I are longtime real estate lawyers. And we came up with the idea of this particular program because we both were made aware of the fire hazard severity maps that have been generated by the Cal Fire, the state agency, sent to the cities to make sure that every city designates what areas they think are ones that are susceptible to fires. And in fact, the parts that are would either get classified as moderate, high risk, or very high risk. What that also does, though, is gives information to the insurance companies, and they make their own risk analysis, but they take those items into consideration. Now, we have two really terrific speakers that are going to be sharing their thoughts with you. First one is Don Schmitz. Don is the president and principal of Don Schmitz and Associates. He's been in the land use consulting business for about 37 years, even though he looks too young to be doing that. He has a firm that has offices in Malibu and Agoura Hills. And I think I saw in the picture about 18 people employed there. So they're very busy practice. What do they do in that area? Well, they consult and specializing in land development, entitlements, strategic planning, project management, dealing with government entities, and advocating for their clients before those entities. And besides his consulting in land use per se, Don has been recognized as one of the preeminent experts in coastal land use planning, very knowledgeable about coastal commission and all of that. Our second speaker is Michael Lynch. Michael will talk about things from the insurance side perspective. Michael has been in the casualty insurance business for about 30 years. Currently, he's with Marsh & McLennan, a large insurance company, where he is the president of the private client services West region. And he's going to be talking to us about what's going on in the insurance sector. We've got a lot of things changing. He's going to talk about those items. He's also going to be focusing on, in part at least, California Fair Plan. What was its origin? What's happened? What will be its future? And those of us who are California taxpayers are interested in knowing about that because we subsidize it. He'll also talk about the difference between the admitted insurance carriers and non-admitted carriers. And he will also let us get an insight into how the insurance companies are going to be calculating premiums these days, what they're going to require in terms of steps that you might take on your property if you're going to do construction, and cutting back on, the land area that's got grows a lot of shrubs, and also, what's called defensible space. And so Michael will do that. Before we go to our speakers, just a couple of housekeeping things that I think we need to know. If you have any questions, and we hope you do, please set them out in the Q&A. Larry will be monitoring that. We hope to be able to get to a lot of them, time permitting. If we go over a little bit past 5 o'clock, we may, have a few minutes to answer some final questions. And I know it's been put on the screen, but if you haven't noticed it, you'll get, if you're a lawyer and you attend, you'll get MCLA credit certificates in a couple of days, probably. And we in the executive committee of the real estate section are really looking for contributions from other people who have ideas. And if you have an interest in making a presentation or coming up with a topic to help others do so, we'd love to have you join. And that's now time to turn it over to Don Schmitz.
Can I interrupt? I'm sorry, Joe, for just one thing. Those of you who haven't seen the materials that the Beverly Hills Bar Association sent you earlier, if you look in the chat, you'll see that there's a link there to the materials. You can download them and have them available that way.
Yeah. And some of the materials are going to be in Don's PowerPoint, so you'll have a chance to see them that way as well. Don?
Well, thank you, Joseph. I appreciate it. I am the aforementioned Don Schmitz. If you can start a PowerPoint presentation, go to the next slide. So the AICP stands for American Institute of Certified Planners. Some contend that means any idiot can plan, but I'll allow you to come to your own conclusions after listening to our presentation. Next slide, please. I am the point man for my firm. There's about 20 of us. As you can see, they're all younger, better looking, better dressed, smarter, but they really are the heart and soul of the firm. And I'm just the sharp end of the spear here. We work all up and down the state of California, not just in the coastal zone. But the fact of the matter is that our consulting practice on entitlements of individual projects, as well as representing counties and cities in front of the Coastal Commission and dealing with state and federal agencies, have a tremendous amount of experience in the issue as it pertains to fire safety, fire safe development, and protection of communities. Next slide, please. So we're going to discuss several things here, the fire severity zones, and what the implications are for local laws and regulations. I was asked focusing a little bit on Beverly Hills and Santa Monica, what wildfire impacts are and solutions to extreme wildfires. I think that the cataclysm that we have experienced here in Southern California very recently, still very fresh, but sadly not completely atypical, is why this is, if you'll pardon the pun, a very hot topic. And a lot of this is going to be germane to what Michael is going to be speaking with you this afternoon as well. Next slide, please. So the fire hazard severity zones are in the state responsibility areas. These are not new. These have been around for a long time. You've got moderate, high, and very high. The very high is class 4, and high is class 3. And so very high would be called a very high fire hazard severity zone. So say that quickly, and I promise that you will get tongue-tied. This has some pretty important implications in regards to property owners, municipalities, and counties in regards to their land use planning and their construction practices. Next slide, please. So this is the city of Beverly Hills. The state mapping for the severity zones did not change The very high fire hazard severity zone, as you can see on the slide, did not change from that which was mapped before. Now, it obviously comes down into the urban area. So there's a couple things which are relevant in regards to that you ought to be aware of. First of all, before Beverly Hills was built, before Los Angeles was built, these wildfires that would start either through spontaneous combustion from piled up biomass or lightning strikes, they would burn and burn and burn. They would come down out of the hills and they would burn right down through the flatland areas and through the grasslands. We've built our communities and our cities in the path of these things. It's a bit of a misnomer that they just were ever confined to the hills. In fact, when the Spanish were coming up through California and on their explorations, they called Los Angeles the Valley of the Smokes. And that was because of all the fires that were burning on an ongoing basis. There was nothing to stop them, and they would burn for days and weeks and months. And that means fire is part of the natural cycle for the sclerophyll vegetation you have here in the Mediterranean climate. Next slide, please. And if you'll just go to the next slide. So basically, both the city of Beverly Hills and the city of Santa Monica have passed local ordinances. More on that in a second. Unlike Beverly Hills, Santa Monica did see some modifications to the state classifications for the very high fire hazard and high fire hazard severity zones as a state map, in which they actually came down to the periphery of the city of Santa Monica. This is actually logical. If you take a look at the Eaton fire, that monster came down out of the San Gabriel Mountains and burned miles into the community. Once it got a full head of steam, there was no stopping it. And so the states modified their mapping in regards to that. And they have, in fact, the city has adopted these maps pursuant to the ordinance, which you see here on the screen. This does have implications, not just on the micro scale, but on the macro scale. And one of the biggest examples of that is, as you may well be aware, the state has been passing a lot of laws to promote higher density housing to address the housing crisis in the state of California. One of the most important ones is Assembly Bill 130, which became law immediately because it was incorporated into the budget bill that was passed up there in Sacramento, removes a lot of the CEQA obstacles and such as it pertains towards doing higher intensity development. One of the caveats to that is in areas that are a very high fire hazard severity zone. That law and the waiver of a lot of the environmental regulations does not apply within these mapped areas. When you go back to the existing development, it's more of a reaction on the micro scale, which I'll discuss next. Next slide, please. There's some important key numbers that you should be aware of. It is only July, but we've already had 44 large wildfires this year. There's been over 219,000 acres. These numbers are from the Watch Duty, which is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. 219,000 acres is probably a higher number now. 29 fire-related fatalities. I know that number is antiquated because they just discovered another fatality or two from the Palisades and the Eaton fires. There's been over 16,255 structures damaged and destroyed by wildfires this year. These numbers just keep going up. But this was not the worst year in regards to acreages. I believe that was 2018, 2019. Next slide, please. So these numbers here are the costs of fighting the fires. These aren't the losses. These are not the damages to real estate, to businesses, to homes, to infrastructure. This is just the cost of fighting the fires. And so from 1980-81 to 84-85, the state spent about $14 million. In 2021 to 2025, they spent $868 million. And remember, we are nowhere near done with 2025. And depending on what the climatic conditions will be going through the end of the year, this could get much, much worse. So we are approaching $1 billion in fire suppression expenses. Those helicopters, the bulldozers, the thousands and thousands of firefighters that are out there, and they are the best in the world, which is a bit of a depressing side note because the best in the world is getting rolled up by these cataclysms. But we're getting close to $1 billion. The estimates are still rolling in regards to the property damage from the Palisades and the Eaton fire. But I'm hearing numbers of upwards to $250 billion, just many tens, hundreds of billions of dollars of real estate damages that have been lost. So, and that of course, it doesn't include the absolutely irreplaceable loss of human life. Next slide, please. So there's a number of solutions to extreme wildfires, and it includes home hardening, developing fire-resistant homes and buildings, wet defensible fire breaks, which I'll embellish upon, first fire defense systems, overlapping sprinkler systems, and prescribed burns. Next slide. So this next slide is fuel modification. That's a fancy way of saying clearing out the stuff that burns around the structure. So combustible vegetation needs to be removed, thinned, or modified with drought-tolerant, fire-resistant plants. And the state law requires 100 feet. County of Los Angeles requires 200 feet. City of Beverly Hills requires 200 feet. County of Ventura requires 100 feet. So 100 feet is sort of your baseline. And so these different fuel modification zones, it depends on how close you are to the structure. Within the first 100 foot of the structure is where you want to see your irrigated landscaping. You don't want to have any native vegetation, and within 30 feet of the structure, you don't want to have any specimen trees, which could act as ladder fuels to convey the fire up onto the roof of the house. When you go out in these areas that require 200 foot of clearance, what LA County refers to as Zone C, it's selective thinning of the native vegetation. You take out the really hazardous species like sage and sumac, and you thin out the more resistant ones like mountain mahogany and ceanothus. So it's more of a natural transition. This is to slow down the fire as it approaches the structures, and it is to reduce the radiant heat. Next slide, please. So home hardening is something that is a code for all new development in these fire hazard severity areas. One of the things that I think that you ought to be looking for is existing homes in regards to home hardening, where there's not a entitlement hook, a permit hook for the jurisdictions to require it. Nonetheless, Michael and other insurers are going to want to see these things done where you have a Class A fire-resistant roof, the eaves boxed in, siding also Class A fire-resistant, dual pane, tempered glass windows. One of the things I didn't mention in the zones of clearance is within 5 feet of the structures, the state's now adopted a zone O. I refuse to call it the O zone. Immediately adjacent to the house, to where you're not allowed to have any bushes, let alone any trees, just gravel or sod or succulents. They have learned that having the bushes planted right up next to the house will convey fire and can take the home. Openings need to be metal screened, and decks need to be, decks act as wicks very often. And so those decks need to be constructed in a fire hardened fashion as well. So next slide, please. This is just a couple examples of what you're looking at. You can see on the right, you've got stucco siding, you've got a tile roof. I used to think these pots and pans Spanish tile roofs were great. They're not. I mean, you can build a campfire on them and it's not going to catch a house on fire, but those embers, which flow like lava, get up underneath them and can get the underlayment burning. Screening the vents, but also a screen over the chimney. A lot of people don't think about this. I've seen homes taken where just you have copious amounts of embers which rain down into the fireplace, which is fine within the fireplace, but then it spreads out over the living room floor floor and takes the house from the inside. Next slide, please. So this is what's happening now. I actually built this on my house from scratch before you started getting these contractors could do it. And it wasn't until I took a close look at the slide I realized this house is right up by my ranch home up in the Santa Monica Mountains. In fact, I permitted this house through the County and the Coastal Commission many years ago, and it did burn down in the Woolsey fire. And as you can see, it's a great house with a tile roof and stucco siding and all that. But when the gentleman rebuilt, he hired this company, Hotshot, and they incorporated this fire suppression system. It's linked in with satellite comms. It has ember detection, auto activation, full perimeter defense. As you can see, he has a vineyard. Those have been outlawed in the Santa Monica Mountains by the Coastal Commission in the County of Los Angeles, by the way, but they make a great fire break. This house is a very safe house, except you got those blowing embers, and it just needs to find one weak chink in the armor and it can take the whole house. And that's exactly what happened before. So these systems are not cheap, but they are very, very effective. Next slide, please. On the macro scale, our government needs to do more. And that starts with good old-fashioned fire breaks. They're proven, they work. They're done now in the middle of a firestorm, where the bulldozers and the crews come out and they grade these in. They're a necessary component to fighting wildfires. The counties and the cities used to do these regularly. The environmental movement shut that down and they stopped doing it. I would contend that the tragedy of the Palisades fire, for instance, is a result of a failed 50-year experiment in land use. We need to start doing these fire breaks again. Next slide, but they can be done a lot more sensitively. Those who argue that fire breaks don't work, by the way, I don't think they've got a leg to stand on. If that's the case, why is it that the fire department rushes around in the middle of an outbreak of a firestorm in the middle of the night, putting their lives on the line to get out there with the 200-foot tall wall of flame coming at them to cut in these fire breaks? I think what we ought to do is make them wet, defensible fire breaks. If you go to the next slide, please. You cut in the fire breaks, and then you provide a more sensitive way to do them if you're pre-positioning them is you use goats. So you're not getting all the environmental damage. In fact, using the goats is something that has been endorsed by the Sierra Club. And the picture on the right is now become a cultural cherished phenomenon in Malibu West. They call it the running of the goats. It's a subdivision in Western Malibu, and they the goat herder brings out all these goats and they go running down the street and the kids laugh, and then they spend all their time in the surrounding hills munching down all the fuel, which makes a huge difference when the inevitable firestorm comes. Next slide, please. So establishing a fire defensive system would be a really good thing to do for Beverly Hills. You do have the Hollywood Hills back behind it. The fires do not have as much time to gain up a full head of steam, unlike the Pacific Palisades and Malibu, where it can start miles inland and fan out to a 3 to 10 mile wide fire front driven by 50-mile-an-hour winds, but it's still there. And so establishing some fire breaks behind Beverly Hills would make a lot of sense. Next slide. My firm has mapped out for the entire Santa Monica Mountains a fire break defensive system because these fires tend to start up in the north, sometimes in the Conejo Valley, and they come roaring down. The Woolsey fire started up above Chatsworth and burned down through the hills and jumped the 101 freeway. It took a couple days before it came down and wiped out the entire western half of Malibu. Next slide. The reason I call them wet defensible fire breaks is because I think that we should pre-position large municipal water tanks, agricultural lines, and put these large sprinklers out there. Each one of these sprinklers would have a 30 to 50 yard range. It basically would rain along the fire breaks. And when you think about what the fire department does currently, they grade in those fire breaks, pre-positioned or otherwise, and then when the fire gets up to the fire break, they hit it like hell with all their aerial assets. With a system like this pre-constructed, you could literally have one fireman who opens up a valve and puts a tremendous amount of water on the fire breaks. Next slide, please. Another thing to consider, as was viewed in the Palisades and also in the Eaton fire, if there was a municipal effort in these what they call the wildland urban interface areas, where they put these sprinkler systems up on risers, even on top of utility poles, they could turn those on, and it would wet down the entire community as the fire front approaches, and keep those embers from taking the homes and hopscotching all the way through those communities with the loss of life and the tremendous damage. Next slide, please. Now, I'm hoping that what we are viewing is a change in the ethos in the state of California as far as this goes. This will take a municipal, county, and statewide effort to take these more macro solutions and make those happen. Now, lots of folks are aware of the governor's executive order setting aside CEQA and the Coastal Act to allow people that were destroyed in the Palisades and Eaton fire from permitting requirements. Not everybody is aware that there was a proclamation of a state of emergency, which is a slightly different animal. And as you can see here, it allows, free of CEQA and free of the Coastal Act, the fire marshal to create a plan for the removal of vegetation for the creation of strategic fuel breaks as identified by approved fire prevention plans. That's CAL FIRE and the local fire marshal. And it also talks about removal of vegetation using cultural, traditional, ecological knowledge for cultural burning and or prescribed fire treatments. That's a fancy way of saying prescribed burns. And we stopped doing prescribed burns. They're very difficult to get permits for. The AQMD is the one that fights them the most, but it's also political. The last prescribed burn that the fire department I know was approved in 2018 around the community of Big Rock in Malibu, and pursuant to the urging of anti-development folks in environmental organizations, Supervisor Sheila Kuehl pulled the plug on that prescribed burn. The community of Big Rock is now, for all intents and purposes, destroyed. So I think the proof's in the pudding in regards to what we need to do to change our approaches on these things. Next slide, and I'll wrap it up with this. One of the things that I also recommend for our clients is that now this is a ham-handed picture. You see some tanks here. They don't have to be ugly. They don't have to fill up your backyard. They can be subterranean. If you have a pool, this is great. But on-site water storage, I think, is very, very important for the survivability of people's homes. And I'm wondering if Michael's going to comment on whether or not this is the type of thing that an insurance carrier could take into account when they are deciding whether or not to insure a home and what it's going to cost a homeowner or a business owner. If you've been paying attention, you know that the hydrants went dry in the Pacific Palisades. You may not have seen much press in regards to the hydrants going dry in parts of Malibu. They usually do. This is something which is sadly ongoing, but if you have on-site water storage, and if you have one of those fire suppression systems with the pumps, maybe even a backup generator, so that if the municipal system breaks down, you will have the ability still to protect your home, and it can, in actuality, all be done remotely and computer controlled. And I'm confident that if there was a lot more of this, we would have whole different scenarios in regards to these inevitable wildfires. So with that, if you go to the next slide, and I will wrap up my presentation. I don't want to dominate the airwaves. I think it's Michael's turn, and after everybody's done, I will be available for any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Don. Wow. If what you're doing today gets boring, Don, we have some risk management jobs that I would love to talk to you about, because you really touched upon some amazing things, and it's the kind of thing that we're out talking about on a daily basis with clients, with communities, with the centers of influence that we might work with, and perhaps for the first time in my career, that message is being heard, and people are asking for more information on how do we better protect ourselves, better protect our communities. It's a shame, and it's quite sad that it takes an event like the Palisades and Altadena fires to perhaps prompt those questions. But we are where we are, and I think it's an important inflection point in our state's history as to how we're going to address these things. And from my perspective, maintain an insurance market that is affordable for all. If you would have told me that, 5 years ago that I'd be sitting here talking to the Beverly Hills Bar Association about insurance, I would have thought you're crazy. But it's become such a prominent issue and such an important issue that I'm glad that I've been able to join you today, and I thank you for the invite. And then I'll start with a question. What if I told you that if we don't get a handle on this insurance crisis, it could turn into a financial contagion? We're beyond insurance crisis at this point. We're in a place and time where if this thing starts to spread, and maybe that's not a great word to use, but if it starts to spread, we could have some serious economic issues in the state of California. As mentioned earlier, I've been in high net worth personal insurance space for 30 years. I spent 27 years on the carrier side of the business with Chubb, AIG, and Pure, and the past 3 with Marsh McLennan Agency here in the Western U.S. And I have never seen a market this bad. And I would suggest that if you have someone that tells you they've seen a market this bad, please introduce them to me, and I'd love to have a conversation with them, because we are dealing with some forces that are different than any other time and place in our history. If you could pull up the slide, I'll hit on a couple of things that I'll plan on talking to you about today. One more slide forward, please. I'm going to give a market update, talk a little bit about the history of the California Fair Plan, the regulatory environment, and then the admitted versus non-admitted insurance. One of the unique things about what we're dealing with is we're dealing with something that quite frankly, a big piece of it started in 1968. In 1968, the California Fair Plan was created as an insurer of last resort. We were coming out of a very difficult time in many ways in inner cities. The Watts riots had recently taken place, and as a result, people were having a hard time finding insurance. And so a plan was developed and to provide protection to those people who otherwise could not find insurance. You fast forward to 2020, and there was $150 billion in exposure sitting in the California Fair Plan. When the Palisades fire and the Altadena fire started, there was about $500 billion in exposure sitting in the California Fair Plan. And here we are 6 months, a little over 6 months later, and there's now $600 billion in exposure in the California Fair Plan. When the Palisades fire started, the California Fair Plan had less than $400 million in cash on hand to pay claims. I'm not a mathematician, but I can tell you that math doesn't work. And not only does it not work, the retention on their reinsurance was $900 million. So they didn't even have enough cash on hand to meet the retention point on their reinsurance. Now, if you think about what that means, and I want to talk about something I think is often misconstrued. The California Fair Plan is not backed by the state of California, and as such, us as taxpayers. It's actually backed by the insurance carriers that write business here in the state of California. So what does that mean? As the California Fair Plan continues to grow, the exposure of the carriers that write business here has grown as well. So in addition to the book of business that they underwrite and they collect premium for, they now have exposure to this monster that is the California Fair Plan. And because there wasn't enough money to pay the claims associated with the most recent fires, for the second time in our history, an assessment was done for $1 billion. So any admitted carrier who writes business in California received the bill. In the case of State Farm, and I'll use them because they're the largest provider of homeowners insurance in the state, they received a bill for over $200 million. Again, for business that they don't underwrite, they don't have on the books, and they don't collect premium for. So as a result of that, what we've seen is carriers, in some cases, start to exit the state. In other cases, in many cases, we're seeing mass renewals across the state. And it's all to lower their exposure to the California Fair Plan, knowing that they financially cannot support the exposure that's on their books. It's a difficult place to be in, and I would tell you that I think we probably have another $1 billion assessment that's likely to take place next year as a result of these same fires. And ultimately, where this comes back around is half of that exposure can be put back towards us. Anybody that has a State Farm policy can get a surcharge on their policy as a result of what they've had to pay as a result of the California Fair Plan. The next big event that is creating massive issues and perhaps the biggest issue is the passage of Prop 103 in 1988. And it did a few key things. It turned the commissioner of the Department of Insurance became an elected position. All the rate filings had to flow through the department. And any rate filing over a certain percentage, the consumer watchdog could come in, the intervener, consumer watchdog, one in the same, and do a review. And what happens is it then takes forever to get approval on a rate increase. It also costs money because the intervener charges and bills for the hours that they spend reviewing these filings. So historically, what carriers have done, the magic number is 7%. If you're below that, it doesn't typically go to an intervener. If you're above that, you're almost rest assured that's what's going to take place. So
Can
carriers,
I interrupt for a second there, Mike? When you say 7%, 7% of what?
7% rate increase.
Okay, so if I have a rate and it's insured and I try to increase it 7% or more, what happens?
Ultimately, that filing that has to go through the state, the third party will come in and they want to take a look at that same filing. So it's just it's another layer in the process that creates time delays. These things are supposed to be approved in 180 days, and I've seen them go as long as 2 years.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So what that does is it creates another inflection point for the carriers. Is okay, we take 6.9, but if our need is 40%, I can't take that, and the game of catch up has just gotten too. The delta is too large to close the gap. So now, in addition to the exposure to the California Fair Plan, the business that they have on the books is underinsured, is underpriced. And so you have massive portfolios of business that need more rate. The easiest way I can say it is, let's say I'm selling something or building something for 90 cents. I'm selling it for $1, 10% margin. That's a fantastic year for an insurance carrier. My rates go up as a result of losses that have happened. I mean, there's any number of factors, but if the rates go up and now it costs me $1.30 to build my product, and I'm being forced by the Department of Insurance to sell it for $1, again, the math doesn't work. You see carriers leave the state. You see more mass non-renewals. And it creates a logjam as to where do we, consumers in the state of California, find our insurance. The other thing that I would include in this is, up until recently, we were the only the only state that didn't allow reinsurance to be a factor into rate making for carriers. Now, those rates in 2023 went up between 30 and 50%. So many of you may know that carriers don't keep all the exposure they have in any one place on their books. They have it's insurance for insurance. Those costs went up 30% or more, but they're not allowed to build that into their rate making. It's a no-win proposition for carriers if you're going to limit how much they can charge for the products that they sell here. So that leads to the fourth bullet point here is, historically, I would suggest that 95% of the California homeowners market was insured with an admitted carrier. Admitted carriers are those carriers who have to file their rates with the Department of Insurance for review. They're filing their policy coverage language. They're filing their underwriting appetite. The other option is the non-admitted option. And I would tell you today that probably 80 to 85% of what we are doing is in the non-admitted market. The rates don't need to be filed with the state. There's a heck of a lot more flexibility and not just price, but in coverage limits. And so carriers can limit their exposure and charge what they feel is necessary to charge for an exposure. I give you one example, and it's mine. I live in an area where I am exposed to some native brush that can't be cleared. It's not private property, state property. I was insured with a carrier paying $5,000 a year for my homeowner's insurance. They filed a 49% rate increase. Let's just say 50% rate increase. So my insurance would have gone up to $7,500. Sounds like a lot, 50%, holy mackerel. They didn't get it approved. They left the state, and the two best options I was able to find, and I've been doing this for a long time with a lot of friends in the industry, but the two best options I was able to find, $25,000. So instead of going up 50%, it went up 5 times. And we're seeing numbers well beyond that in places like Beverly Hills, because the numbers instead of 5 to 25 are 50 to 400 or $500,000 a year for some of these homes. So we're stuck at a point where what's going to happen next? Well, the insurance commissioner's term is up in 26. Personally, I don't think we can wait that long, but to me, it seems like we're slow playing the results. The fact of the matter is that all of us have to pay more for our insurance in California. And I'm not talking those of us that have gone from an admitted product to a non-admitted product. I'm talking about the general market, the admitted market. We have to allow rate to flow through that market. And if we do, it will bring back options, which brings back competition, which brings back the choice that we need when we're making a buying decision on where we're going to go. It is not uncommon today to have situations where we only have one option for a client. And that's it. And it's not a pretty option. And we're giving you something that is got less coverage for a lot more money. And it's a difficult conversation to have, as you might imagine. It's not fun, but I would suggest to you that if you have clients that are falling into this kind of situation, or if you yourself are falling into this situation, please connect them with a good broker who can walk them through this process, has access to markets, and make them aware of what's going on. Because ultimately, it's going to come back to we as homeowners, we as communities, to doing a lot of the things that Don was speaking to, hardening our homes, hardening our communities. Unfortunately, a lot of that responsibility is going to fall on us, and that's just where we are. The fact that this part of the issue dates back upwards of 57 years is pretty amazing thing, and it's also perhaps more amazing that we couldn't see this coming. I can tell you, for one, anybody that was paying attention could see what was happening to the market, starting back in 2017 with the Woolsey fire, and then going forward when inflation kicked in 22, reinsurance rates went up in 23. The regulatory market and what was happening there, the writing was on the wall, and it was like the perfect storm. And the market has since fallen apart, and it's going to take some time to get back to any sense of normalcy. And the last thing I'll point out, and this is where I'm going to get into this whole financial contagion thing, and I don't want to scare anybody, but you know, California homeowners have about $2 trillion in equity in their homes. And if all of a sudden they can't sell their house because the cost of insurance, or because they can't find insurance, now we're impacting the real estate market. We start to see some pressure on values, and we're seeing that already. It starts to impact a lot of different aspects of our economy, builders. I can go down the list, but and that's where it gets a little scary. So again, you know, it's a lot of information to share with you in 15 minutes, but I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have about this topic or anything else associated with the insurance piece of this.
Thank you, Mike. If I may raise a question, we've gotten a very good perspective from Don, from the planning background that he has, and you've gotten a background from your insurance situation. How, if at all, do the fire maps and their extension or non-extension to high severity or low severity impact or have an effect on insurance? Are these two different tracks that are irrelevant to each other? Among our materials, we provided a statement of the insurance commissioner about the new fire hazard maps. But do those fire hazard maps really have an impact on how the insurance companies assess their risks and decide what to charge?
Yeah, it's a great question, and what I would tell you is they are a factor. They are not the only factor. And I point back to the fact that carriers already, their actuarial data is telling them that their books of business are already underpriced in California. So they need rate there. But the second part of that is there was a carrier that I won't name that at the time of the Woolsey fire in 90210, they had $15 billion worth of exposure. The only way they found that out was because that fire was ripping from Thousand Oaks over to Malibu. The maps that carriers are using today internally are better in that they can get down to street level mapping to know what their exposure is. You know, these carriers have hundreds, thousands of underwriters, and it's very easy for the underwriter over in this cubicle to say yes to a large account in Beverly Hills, the one over here saying yes to another account that happens to be the neighbor, and not know what that's doing as you're going down the block. And next thing you know, you got $1 billion in exposure in houses, in art, in cars, in jewelry, and things of that nature. So aggregates and exposure plays a role, and mapping certainly has a role in that as well.
So if I understand it correctly, the insurance companies have their own way of doing it, and it can be a house-to-house thing.
Absolutely.
So we have an example in the handout. I guess it's number 2 of that. People want to look at that of an Allstate insurance looking at particular characteristics of a property. It seems to me, if I understand it correctly, and I'm listening to both Don and Mike on this, you're both saying that we need to spend more money on stuff we're not spending money on. Don, is that right? We're just not doing enough to protect ourselves? And Michael, we're not paying enough for insurance.
Well, if I could address it first, yes, we're not doing enough. Folks ought to be more proactive in regards to hardening their homes. Look, it's easy for us to pontificate, right? Some folks, you know, they're worried about putting groceries on the table and paying their taxes. And so we tend to think about these areas as being very affluent because that makes the news a lot. Pacific Palisades, Malibu, of course, over and over. This is the Beverly Hills Bar Association meeting. But I think the Eaton Altadena fire really was somewhat jarring, much more of a middle-class neighborhood. The biggest loss of life in California from a wildfire was the Paradise Fire, where something like 88 people perished. The city fathers thought it would be a great idea to have traffic calming and created a choke point for people to evacuate. And they were immolated. So they're trying to rebuild that community, but these are not affluent areas. But look, here's the harsh reality. We live in earthquake country. We are requiring certain commercial property owners to engage in seismic retrofitting and upgrades. Otherwise, those buildings are going to kill a lot of people in the next earthquake. And I think the fires are getting right up there with them as it pertains to the potential loss of life and damage to property. So even though I'm an ardent property rights advocate and libertarian, I chafe over too much government regulation. We have way too much in California. That being said, I think that there needs to be a concerted effort to identify these areas and see what can be done to proactively educate people. Malibu's doing that. They have 2 or 3 specialists which go out to these neighborhoods and tell people, look, you really ought not to have that pine tree right there next to the house. And you shouldn't have the firewood stacked up here next to the side. You need to box in that deck and get on top of your brush clearance, put the vents screening, get that done. But also on the macro scale, we need to invest in this, and especially in the wildland urban interface areas. We need to do those fire breaks. We need to pre-position water. We need to do those prescribed burns. I think that that's something that's going to take a lot of leadership from our elected officials.
Yeah.
And so,
Guys-
Mike, if I understand it correctly, you think there's we need to pay more for insurance, but we could achieve something less than the things we're getting now if we had a better regulatory environment. Is that right?
I think it brings it takes away the extremes. Okay, so instead of having to go from $5,000 to $25,000, the rate is $7,500. I'm just making those numbers up. It's $7,500 because the home has been hardened the right way. I've done everything that I can possibly do to better protect my house. It's going to cost me to do that, but it's better than paying $25,000 every year for my homeowner's renewal. And so until we get to a place where we start to recognize that these are the things that we can do, and I agree 100% with Don. It's not just us as individuals, but from a government standpoint, to allow some of this to happen is an absolute must. The scary part to me is, for the longest time in my career, California conversations were all about earthquake. We talk about earthquake very little anymore. It is all wildfire, and that's what reinsurers are looking at. That's what the industry is looking at because they have had such a massive impact over the last handful of years. And so we're all going to have to play a part. I share with you one story if I could. After the Woolsey fire, we went out into some communities and tried to have some conversations with different associations, and we're in one of them, and there was a lady in there who was an ardent, we need to do this as a community. We need to do this community. When we got to her house, she had these massive Italian cypress, which if you've ever seen an Italian cypress burn, it is like a Roman candle. And when we said they should come down, she's like, no, I these privacy. I said, I can't take these down. So there's a psychological element to this too, that we have to recognize and make sure that we're playing our part.
There's a question from Elizabeth Rafidi for you, Mike, which is, in light of the fires and the expected outlays by the insurance companies, not to mention potential lawsuits against insurers and government agencies, this is California the United States, we generally sue everybody anytime we can think of it. Do you see any hope for addressing your concerns on a governmental level?
The last part broke up a little
Do
bit.
you see any hope for addressing your concerns at the governmental level?
Well, I would tell you that there's a lot of lobbying going on. I think that the challenge we have is I think there's individuals that understand it, and so the association that represents independent agents and brokers across the state was lobbying on their own behalf, and then they joined hands with the Contractors Association and the Builders Association and the Winemakers Associations, and they've come together as one voice to put some pressure on our legislators to address this issue and to recognize that this isn't something that's going away, and until we do such thing, we're going to be stuck. Because the point about people not living in Beverly Hills who are on a fixed income, they're the ones that are impacted the most. You know, someone living in Beverly Hills, yeah, their rate's going to go up, and in many cases they can afford it. They might not like it, but they can afford it. But if I'm on a fixed budget and all of a sudden the rates go up to where now you're talking about a whole different decision you have to make. Unfortunately, with the Palisades fire, probably true in Altadena, people have some of those people whose home had been handed down from grandma and grandpa to mom and dad to now the children, they just said, the heck with it. I'm not going to insure it. I'm going to roll the dice. It's too expensive. And now they've lost all that equity in that house because they were forced into making a decision that impacted them in the way that it ultimately did. There's some really sad stories, as you might imagine, around
Oh,
it.
I've been hearing some of them. We have a question from Martin Murphy and another one from Howard Gould, who happens to be the co-chair of the real property section. They deal with economics. Mr. Murphy is asking really a question that's more of an economic thing for Don in terms of practical questions. How do you make a decision about what cost really? He's asking whether I could buy thicker glass and that would be X dollars more expensive. He says 60,000 for one. He's thinking of a 2,000 square foot house. Rather than other glass, how do you make that economic decision of how much I'm going to put into this? And Howard Gould, who's the chair of this section, is saying, how about, Don, you mentioned sprinklers along ridge lines and elsewhere. Don, Howard is asking, how about putting sprinklers on top of your house? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Let's start with the glass. First of all, the default, of course, is the fire codes that have been adopted for home hardening to get a permit in these designated areas. And that is the dual pane glass. And that is not something which is negotiable. You will do that. And so it's really not, can I afford it? If you are rebuilding your house, that is what you need to do. Now, I read the question, and there are other alternatives for thicker single pane tempered glass. I do have some clients where they want to go that route, especially with very large picture windows, because you get less distortion, but it's very expensive. And I'm now in the process, my building and safety group, of negotiating with the building departments and the fire department to see if that will pass muster as far as that goes. So that's a economic decision, which is personal, and somebody can decide what it is that they want to do. But if they're rebuilding a home in one of these designated fire zones, they are going to have to do the dual pane glass, and they work. They definitely work. I've seen it firsthand many a times. The outer pane can crack from the radiant heat, but the inner pane survives, and that prevents the penetration of the embers into the house, which is where even a very stout home or business can be lost. I've seen that happen many a time. In regards to the sprinklers, look, we're all doing what we can, right? And so an individual property owner or anybody's clients, they can't really sit back and say, city of, county of, get your butt up there and start doing the fire breaks and put big ag sprinklers on. Oh, they could and they should. They should lobby their local elected officials to do that. But you have to start at home. And that's something that you can control. Now, be advised, when we're talking about these fire suppression systems for an individual building, the fire department and the forestry divisions, which handle the brush clearance, will not allow you to do that in lieu of the proper fuel management. Okay, but they will allow you to do it, and that's something you can control your own destiny on. So if you do the fire hardening of the structure, maintain the fuel management reduction, and put one of these systems on your house, you're going to be in an exponentially better position as it pertains to survivability.
I have a question, and that is, I can drive around the west side. I can look at the Beverly Hills fire hazard map, and I can say, wow, I've been right near the Beverly Hills Hotel. I've been in that we now see very severe fire hazard area. I don't see any 100-foot clearances around those houses up there. I see a lot of really nice, tasty vegetation for a fire. How is it that we can have all these restrictions and still have such dense foliage and close together housing in that area?
Changing rules, lack of proactive enforcement. Okay. Now, in other areas that people traditionally think of, say if you had a house up in the Hollywood Hills or the Santa Monica Mountains and somebody's got a large parcel, an acre or larger, and they're plucking a house down in the chaparral, it's readily transparent in regards to getting that 200-foot of brush clearance around it. And if they don't have it, then another arm of the government called the Weed Abatement District, they come out and they will take a look at it. The fire department will make sure for the brush clearance on your subject property that you are maintaining it as you are supposed to. And if the radius of your brush clearance goes onto a neighbor's property, they will send a notice to that neighbor. They're actually obliged to clear the hazardous brush off of their property to maintain the 200-foot radius around your home. And if they don't do it, they will send out a crew that charges you by the square foot. I swear, I think it's a team of attorneys with weed whackers because it's really expensive. And they will clear it on your property and they will put it on your tax bill. Now, when you get these urban areas, it's much more complicated. You have sometimes very affluent people that are very fond of their cypress trees. And Michael, I can tell you, I've watched film clips of homes being lost because of cypress trees and things of that nature. And it gets real complicated when not only on the existing home where the government comes in and says, cut down those trees, pull the bushes back 5 feet from the house, but also it's going to the neighbor and saying, you got to do some major clearance of your very expensive landscape that you've invested in over the last 20 years. It gets very complicated. It can get very litigious. And therein lies the answer on why we have not proactively addressed this problem in these urban wildland interface areas.
Well, it sounds like a good answer to give to a group of lawyers that they might need to get involved and deal with people like Don and help people deal with Mike. I think, Joe, we have achieved our hour and a little bit over, and maybe we should turn it over to you.
I just want to add one thing, that within the last 10 days, there was a trial level decision in a case which supports what Mike said about the surcharge. It was an attempt to have a judge decide, and the judge did decide that it was lawful for the insurance companies as a group to pass through in their upcoming policies to policyholders 50% of what their losses were. And there was testimony that you're talking about $1 billion of losses. That means $500 million have to be passed through in the upcoming period. That's a lot of money. Well, thank you, everybody, for being with us. And we really, I think, have learned an awful lot about the challenges that we face. Not going to be decided quickly. And I do think that something has to be done governmentally, and just who's got the ability to effectuate that, I don't know. But thank you, Don. Thank you, Mike. And Larry, let's, I think, close up. Was there any other question that you thought we should answer?
No, there's only one quick thing. I've noticed that this is not the only state with terrible insurance problems.
Yeah.
I'm told that for completely different reasons, Florida has the worst insurance market in the country. We don't have their hurricanes. We don't have their tornadoes. We don't quite have this much torrential rain. So I wonder, to the extent we can learn something from other places that have to deal with this, it could be interesting. I'm not sure the
Yeah.
answer is always in the California legislature.
Texas is a big problem. A number of Western states because of brush exposure. Yeah, this isn't just a California thing, but California happens to be one of the nastiest.
Yeah. Oh, God, this has been fun. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you for having us.